like a and let me just start from here. And I actually put in the subtitles, so I hope that that's okay. And when I'm in this view, I can't see the chat very well, and I'm very informal, so just feel free to unmic and ask a question if you want to. If you feel like you want to put it in the chat, go right ahead, and I'll go back through there and look at those. Or if Dr. Miller or Dr. Alexander see something sitting in there, feel free to say, hey, Cynthia, we've got a question here. So we're going to cover APA 7th, as Dr. Robertson said. We're just going to cover the highlights here. I mean, that is a whole manual, so I can't get through everything, but we're going to get through the things that I think are really important. Again, my name is Cynthia Henry, and I'm the librarian for the College of Human Sciences. You can see on this screen that there's a link for the library guide that I've created for the Family Consumer Sciences Education. And it's a pretty easy URL, just this FCSE on the end. So I think you should be able to remember that. But it's active here now, and you'll have it. I'm just going to click through here. So here's the manual for the APA 7th edition. It is, the real title is the 7th edition publication manual of the American Psychological Association. And it's very colorful, and they do have a tabbed edition if you're using that. But you can find a lot of resources online too. But if you're ever stumped for something, this is the place that you need to come back to. And I'm just going to kind of minimize this a bit here more, I think, because I think we will not see my slides as well, but then you cannot see my, I think I'm going to see if I can get rid of that totally. Maybe I can put it on the far side, and then I won't have to. Or maybe up here at the top. Yeah, maybe that, oops, sorry guys. Let me locate this, and then we will see what we're going to do. I'm going to put it right there, I guess. My titles will not be seen, I guess, but let's see if I can, maybe I'll do it. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to totally take that away and put that back up in the corner. That's much better. Okay, so for the recording, that will be helpful. Okay, so here are some of the basics that I thought were pertinent to cover. So as we're going through this, we're going to talk about in-text citations, which are in the text of your paper, right inside your paragraphs, and then the complete citations are at the end of your paper. And APA really refers to that as a references list, but I may say bibliography. In the library world, we kind of interchange those, but officially APA uses a reference page. All of the references should have a hanging indentation, and we can talk about that more. You'll see it, and I'm sure you're aware of it. And then all are alphabetized by last names. And then the new thing in 7th is you're going to have sentences that end with a period and a space, as demonstrated here on the screen. And then the new sentence begins with a capital, of course. But previous to this edition, it was period, space, space. And I don't know about y'all, but when I was in typing class, that's what we learned too. You would put an end, a period, and then do space, space, and then move on. And so I thought that that was something significant that we might point out. So you'll notice too on this slide that if there's a tip from something from the 6th that was totally different now in the 7th, I'm just going to put a little note there. I'm going to try not to compare and contrast too often, because if you're just learning, there's no reason for you to get that in your head. But there are some things that I think are in 6 that are so pertinent that I will actually show them on the screen, and usually have them strike through in yellow as well. So just be aware of that. So here we are looking at book citations. So you can see if we're just going to cite the classic novel To Kill a Mockingbird, we would cite it this way. The difference here is we do not have a place of publication now. So let's just talk about what a citation is built with anyway. So you always have your author at the front, unless you don't have an author, of course. But then it's last name with a comma with the initial. If you know the middle initial, please add that. You don't always, so sometimes you will just have an initial. Then you always have the date, the year, and then you have the title to the book here. But usually anything that's italicized is the title to the biggest container of that item. So I try to remember this format in my brain where it's like authors at the front, year, title to the biggest container of that format, and then what other things need to be added at the end. So in this case, a publisher. And not always will you add that to every citation. And then the next one, even when we have something a little bit more complicated, we have two authors here, and then the date, and then the title to this book is italicized. This happens to be the 5th edition, and then it's published by Humana Press. One nice thing I like about APA, as it's one of my favorite citation styles, if I can be that geeky and say as a librarian, but it's because almost all the little segments are separated by a period. So you have your authors and then a period. You have your date and a period. You have the title or the italicized container title, and then usually a period unless you have to add in just a few extra things. So that to me makes it simple. I don't have to remember if it's a comma or a semicolon or something like that. So now I'm just going to move on, and we're going to talk about digital object identifiers. You probably know these as DOIs. And this is one of the things that I was saying that it's so big that it's changing here in APA 7th that I thought we should really focus on it a little bit. So DOIs are formatted as an HTTPS URL now. You will not see it cited any longer with the DOI semicolon and just the string of the numbers. So that is something I think we all need to focus on, as that's not only just going to be like in our journals, but maybe you have an ebook that you're going to be collecting and that it has a DOI. So just depending on what item is there, a thesis might have a DOI. So you would have, or a dissertation, those items, you would want to include the DOI as the HTTPS. So here's an example with a journal. Again, we have the authors at the top, and we do have the initials here. Then we have our year, and then we have the title to the article, which is not italicized because the title to the journal is. So remember I said that the biggest container of that item is the italicized part. And so a journal article is the smaller title, but the title of the article is the smaller part of the journal. And so the journal is the italicized part. And then we have the volume and the issue, which is the 8 and the 1 there. And the issue number is always put in parentheses. And sometimes, journals can be published in a lot of different ways. They can be published weekly, monthly, annually, quarterly, sometimes even seasonally. So occasionally you will have the word winter in the middle of the parentheses, or fall, depending on when the article was published. And then we have the page numbers, and now we have the DOI as the HTTPS at the end. Now, as you're starting to build your references, you're going to see some things won't wrap up right next to the end of the pages. And it's okay to have it sit like this. But if it's short enough to sit up underneath there, you can do that as well. And we'll see that later in the presentation. Okay, so now let's specifically talk about journal citations. So here we are. We have our journal citations. We have 3 authors, then our date. Again, our title is listed there, and let's talk about that title. So this title of the article has a subtitle. So you can see that the first letter in the word lightning is capitalized, but then nothing else, then you have your semicolon for your subtitle, and the V is capitalized again, but then again, nothing else after. And then the journal title is italicized and capitalized as the journal would capitalize it. So, and then you have your volume and issue and page range. And then you can see here's an example with the HTTP sitting up next to the end of the page ranges. And so that is how you would do that. And then you can also see that our hanging indentation here is set out. And stylized, that should be at least a ½ an inch. And so you can set that up in your Word. And we're going to open Word later and kind of do a demo so you can find some items in there that I think are not always very prominent, but I think would help you set up your paper settings, if you will, a lot easier if we kind of did it real quick together. So then we wanted to talk about videos, and so you would have to cite a video, and I just grabbed a TED Talk here. So we didn't know the author's middle initial, but then you just take the title to the video, and it's the italicized part here. And you do bracket video anytime you cite that. And so that could be a podcast. This is a TED Talk. You could grab something off of YouTube, Netflix, anything that you can see that is streaming. That's how you could cite those. Now, we do have some streaming video collections in the library, but you would not cite them in the same way because those would be out of a database. So you would be looking for electronic resource from the library and citing it from the database point of view. And you can find that in APA, and we can talk about that if y'all have questions. But so this is a video that is maybe living on the open web. And so you can see that I cited TED there, but I could put Netflix or YouTube or whatever, as I said. And then the URL is listed here, and it's wrapped. And sometimes that's hard to get it to wrap, but if you play around with your margins, then you should be able to get that to set nicely in a hanging indent. And it's much easier in Word than it is in PowerPoint, and we can talk about that when we're in our Word demonstration. So, okay, let's talk about electronic resources. So previously, you would have to put the retrieved from. You no longer have to include that unless it is imperative to the data. So for example, here at the bottom of the slide, I have a COVID citation, and this is actually from the New York Times, and they are actually updating their published date every time they update it so that people know when they're putting that information out and updating it. So this one is actually a publication date, and the retrieved by date is the same, but sometimes that would not be. So that would be something like if you grab something from like Wikipedia that may be updated before your readers see that same page, or like if you're doing WikiHow, anything that is edited by a lot of people or you expect it to be edited, you would still include the retrieval date. But if you do not expect that, if you think it's pretty static, like if you're citing tax code from the IRS that hasn't changed in a long time, that's on a URL, you could leave that date out. And that would be this retrieved by part here at the end. So, oops. So just be aware of that. Other things here is you need to include the website name unless it's the same as the author. And if you're citing a newspaper article off a newspaper site, the part that is italicized is the newspaper. So again, we're trying to get you to remember to cite the biggest container you can of that item as the italicized part. Otherwise, if I wouldn't know that website, I would always cite, italicize the article name. So in this case, if I didn't really know the New York Times, but it was just some website that I found, like on a college URL maybe, then I would italicize the COVID in the U.S. latest maps and case counts. Okay. So, so for ebooks, you don't include a format, platform, or device unless you are using an abridged version. So, for example, if you are citing an ebook that is the same as the printed version, you don't need to have any format, platform, or device. But if you are using an audiobook and you plan to cite the narrator, you would need to include the audio platform and then, of course, the narrator's name. Otherwise, you could just cite it as it is below here. This is an ebook out of the library, and you don't need to include anything. And you can see it's just like a regular book, just has the authors and the year and the title to the book itself, and then the publisher is Wiley. Okay, so let's talk about personal interviews. So I've already had more than one person contact me about this for the APA site. So I'm so glad that we were putting this on the list to discuss tonight, because the personal interview is really considered a personal communication. And so APA really is trying to help the reader be able to locate the information that you're citing, so that if they wanted to read that piece of information, either a book or a journal article or the website, or look at the stats wherever you gathered that from, they could go and do that. But they could not find something that would not be published. So if you're really citing like an email from somebody else or some other kind of personal communication, then that doesn't have to have a formal citation in your reference list at the end of your paper. Now, you still want to put an in-text citation in the paper, but just reference that as, who you were talking to and the year, but then there's no formal format for that in your reference list. And so there's 3 types of interviews that APA has kind of identified now, and it is published interviews. So that would be something like a magazine or a newspaper interview, then personal, which is what we just discussed, and then research participants. Now, research participants, you would think, oh, is that a personal interview? It's not, because it will really be in a study. And so if you are creating that study, then you can include that information. Like, this is the survey we use to do the gathering of the data. Or if you really talk to 20 people, you could decide to include that as an appendix. And so depending on what you're wanting to release. Then published interviews should just be cited as whatever they are. If they're a magazine or a radio show, then you would just cite that as that container. So you don't have to really know how to cite a published interview. You would be citing the thing that it is. So like if it was an interview on a podcast, I would cite that as a podcast. I would cite that as a radio show, whatever format it is. I did think that this was so important, and I think some of y'all will come back and utilize that I put the link here. And so you can just click on this and then see where I found this on the APA site. And I just thought that information was useful to me as I was trying to build some information, not only for this presentation, but like I said, I've already had other people contact me wanting to know what to do about this issue. So this is a big change from 6 to 7. Okay, so now a little bit of interactiveness. Maybe I'll put our pictures back up so we can see that. So I kind of like to say, if anybody could identify, what is this? Is this a book or a magazine or a newspaper, or what else have we covered? An ebook, a book and chapter, a chapter in a book. Does anybody have an idea? Anybody putting something in the chat? If you don't want to raise your hand and say something. It's a hard one, I'll say that much. So this really is a chapter in a book. And so let's kind of talk about the pieces here. So we have the author that we're very familiar with, our year. This is the title to the chapter. And this little N gives me the big clue of what it is. So then it's in the changing the subject is the book itself, and here is the pages, and here is the publisher. So, okay. Then I thought we might talk about things that might be really hard to cite, because I've had people ask me these things, and I thought we would just have a little bit of a discussion if y'all wanted to. But I was trying to build a concept of what is something, if I have something in my hand, how do I just know what to cite it is? And the more familiar you are with the citation styles of each format, journals, books, chapters in a book, newspapers, videos, ebooks, then you will be able to identify that. So a lot of times people will come to me with a report from our government document section and say, how do I cite this? And so APA has this whole section on government documents too, so you can go in there and find that. But you already know how to start out with that. You would first write down your authors, just as you would with the format that we've already been using, our last name, comma, and our initials. Especially if we have the middle initial, we would include that. We would include up to 20 authors. So government documents a lot of times are, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this again. So you can see over here. Oh, I do see a chat person just now. Oh, maybe that's not needs to be here. So I'll read that in a minute. Okay, so a government document is, so we would already know the authors, then we know the year, we would identify the year, and then we got to start thinking about what is the biggest container there. So if that is from a whole department in the government, we could see that information. You would see some of this on the document itself, so you would be able to identify that. And then we may want to make sure we're clear in any pages that are included in that report, and identify any authors that are governmental authors. So a big committee would be listed in that. The same thing sometimes happens with document delivery. Sometimes people come to me and say, oh, I got this in such a different way. I don't know how to cite this. So even if you get something from document delivery, which is our interlibrary loan system at the Texas Tech libraries, you would still cite it just the same way. So if it's a journal article, you would cite it that way. Since it is a journal article and you may not be getting that from an electronic database, you would just cite it as a basic journal. You may have the DOI, you may not. And so you would just put together your bigger pieces, making sure you're including your volume and issue, and the page range at the end. So sometimes I think that throws people off, depending on if they just got that piece of information in a different way than they normally do. Oh, I didn't get this out of PsycInfo or any other kind of database. I really found it on the shelf, or my professor handed it to me. How do I go about citing that? So just kind of think it out and think about how you would look that up. And again, you can always reference the APA manual. And I have some helpful resources at the end. So one of them is Al Purdue APA. And I think that's really easy to use because you can even search that site. And it will allow you to find the piece that you're looking for. Once you identify what it is, that's half the battle. So then you can just kind of follow the format that is listed on the page. Okay. Okay, there we go. So one thing that is quite new in APA 7th is that there is a whole chapter on what language should be used in papers. And they are really trying to make sure that you're going to be including inclusive and bias-free language. So some of that, as I was reading that chapter, I found that instead of just being a broad range of ages, so previously sometimes you would say something 25 and younger, or 60 or 65 and older. They really don't want you to be doing that now. They want you to kind of focus, see if you can make it a specific range. So like 65 to 75, let's say. Or if you were talking about a disability, you may not want to be saying, oh, you know, this person is a dwarf. You would want to say, you know, he is of small stature. And then they've identified in their gender language that they're going to use they as the neutral pronoun. So they're really encouraging anybody to not use gendered pronouns, but to use they. Now that doesn't come up a lot in research, because if you're really talking about a whole population, let's say you're doing a study on women, you would say the women of the study did this. You wouldn't really be using pronouns there. But if you had to describe interaction in a interview or something like that, they'd really be identifying. You could say Cynthia Henry is the person, or if you're not releasing names, which is usually standard, then you would just describe they as a person. So, oh, and another one I thought was really good is that for social economic status is, instead of just describing a group of people by their adjective, let's say something like the poor, you would say people living in poverty. So just trying to make sure that our language is being as inclusive and bias-free as possible. So some basics on our paper that we might need to know. Traditionally, Times New Roman is a font that the APA has always used at size 12, but they've also included Calibri 11, Arial at 11, and Georgia at 11. And I kind of made sure that that is something that we wanted to discuss tonight, because I know that my Word is using Calibri as a standard now instead of the traditional Times New Roman. So you may be good with using one of these other fonts. I know Arial was really popular there for a while too. But these all look pretty similar. So you could decide on what you were wanting to use. And then the page numbers all need to be on the right side at the very top, and it's on all pages. And I think that's new, but I couldn't quite remember from 6, and I didn't bother to look it up. But traditionally, I thought you used to not put it on your first page. So make sure that it's on all your pages. All margins should be 1 inch around, and I'll show you how to kind of set that if some of these things are not clear. I think some of these things we all do in Word easily, and then some of these things they're like, oh, I only do that every so often. So it'll be good to kind of cover that. And then that all papers are double spaced. Now, let's kind of talk about our title page. APA 7th has created a title page for professionals and a title page for students. So I'm covering the title page for students, but your professor may say to you, no, I want you to use the professional one. So on here, all text on the title page should be centered in the page. The title should be bolded, and it should be in title case. And that means any important words are capitalized. And I'll show you an example. Then your name, then you should have the department and the university that you're submitting that to. I use Texas Tech here because we're all using it for Texas Tech. And then your class number and your class name with a semicolon in there. And the department and the university are separated by a comma. Then it should be your professor's name. And you may really want to check with your professor how they should be addressed. If they have a preference here, then use that one. Most, I think it would be safe to put doctor and then their name. And then the last is the date. And let's kind of look at that together. So here's a quick example. So here is my bolded title, and I have a subtitle here. So I would just put in a semicolon in between, and look at that. So we can kind of talk about what is the title case here. So examining voter turnout, a historical view through the decades. So through the is not capitalized, but any other. And then anything after the semicolon, I wouldn't normally capitalize that in title case, but because it's the first word after the semicolon, it's the first word of the subtitle, it would be capitalized. So if you're doing anything like that, maybe we might want to discuss what should be capitalized, what shouldn't be capitalized. Then you usually skip one time, and then you put your name. Then you put the department that you're going to be submitting this to at the university you're going to be submitting this to with a comma in between. Then you put the title, the class number, designation, and then the name of the class. And then I used Dr. Alexander here as an example. And then I put in the date. And this would be the due date of the item usually. So let's talk about the running head. So 2 things changed here. In student papers, you don't have to have a running head at all. So then you would not have anything sitting up at the top of your page other than a page number. If you end up using a running head, because I am not sure how quick professors are going to adapt to this, and I hate for this to be out there and people are like, I didn't need a running head. But you just may want to clearly establish that with your professor, making sure that you're not using the running head as a student paper. But if you are going to be using a running head, now previously in 6 you had to put running head, a semicolon, and then the running head, which is part of your title or a shortened part of your title. For example, if we go back to this, I would just have used examining voter turnout as my running head for this paper if I needed one. So here's an example. I put global warming on the other side. Notice that it is all capitalized and is on the same line as your page number. So, and this would be on all of your pages as well, which I think is different than in 6. So, but again, if you're a student, you don't even need this. So that's a win. Sometimes formatting that part is 30 minutes in itself. So let's talk about in-text citations now. So this is a difference. Previously, you had to list up to 3, 4, and 5 authors on the first citation, but that is not the case. If a work has 3 or more authors, the first citation always uses et al. That should be tiny. I'm sorry about that. I changed it multiple times, but it wanted to be a capital because it had the period there. So I tried to catch it, but I didn't get the last version. Sorry. And so you can see example here. So Seguin et al. This means that this item has at least 3 or more authors. Now that means that anything that just has a single author or 2 authors will look like this. So this is with an ampersand for the 2 authors and the year. And of course, if it was just Adams, you would just have Adams, comma, and then the year. So that'll be nice. In-text citations will be really easy to do now. You just have to have the first name or the 2 authors' names. I think I could, manually type that quite easily. And et al. Is pretty easy to remember, and then you just have the comma as you would any author name behind it. So I think that's good. Oh, we have somebody in the chat, a couple chats. Do we want to talk about that? Oh, maybe not. Oh, is there a period after the et al? Yeah, so just like how it is written here, Dr. Robertson, that's a good question. It is ET period space AL period and then a comma. So that is, all of that is one kind of unit, if you will. You would have the author name, let's say Smith or Clark or whatever you want to say. And then a space. Uh-oh. I hope I don't lose y'all. So, nope, you have 2 periods here, if I understand this question. The et al. Is really typed like this.
Cynthia, before you didn't have a period after ET before, Cynthia, in the old version that we saw.
Oh, okay.
In the book, in the APA 7th edition book, it has it without the period after the T.
Okay, well, let's double check that tonight. I'll look that up, but I really got that out of the book. So I don't know, what page are you on?
318.
318. Okay, let's look at that. I don't have my book here. It's at the office, but we can definitely do that. I don't want that to be wrong, so thank you so much for bringing that up. We'll definitely look at that before we get done. But I had got that, and so I had seen that way. So maybe I wrote it down wrong, but let's see. Okay, let us look at the next one. Oh, there it goes. Okay, so in our reference list, previously you only had to list 7 authors, but now they want you to include up to 20 names in the references. So again, you're doing last names and first initials. So I gave an example here that has several authors, more than just the 7. And then remember, you always have an ampersand before the last author is included. And so this is a big difference because before you were just including up to 7. And so I think this will be one that we all need to be kind of conscious of. So, okay, and then so then we have some helpful resources here. I really like this APA style. It's very useful. That's where I got that personal interview or personal communication information. There is one here that I thought was really good. I wasn't sure how well Zoom would let us pop into the web and back. I really like a quick reference, and this is one of those, and if we can get that to flow over really easily, I'll pop over there because it has the colorized of each section, and that kind of helps me build that in my brain, like authors is a section in a color a year, and so I can start kind of looking at that. And then if you wanted to have some more instruction, there's some tutorials out by APA, and I think ACRL and Choice, which are two library organizations, got together with APA and put those on. There's 2 or 3 listed on this page, and I'll help you kind of identify anything else that is big that you might want to cover. And then here's the one that I mentioned earlier, the Al Purdue with APA. I just really like this setup, and it's easy to search. You can search with your text if you wanted to with the Control F and find anything on a long page of HTML. So it's very easy to use. And then when in doubt, always check your manual, as we just had somebody do that right now. That was really good timing. Sometimes I have to look that up myself, and you can just dig that out and dig through there. It's really useful. And then here's my references for what I cited today in my own presentation. But there's a mistake on this page. Can anybody find it? I hear somebody.
It's not italicized.
It's not italicized? It is not in a hanging indentation. So.
Oh, on that one, yes. I was looking at the American Psychological Association, the manual part.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. That's right. It should be italicized. Good night. That's craziness. All right. And then
did you see my last question in the chat?
Sure. Let's look at that. And then I did want to do that. I think it would be cool to look into Word. So if we wanted to do that, let me just get up here and let me stop sharing for a second, and then I'll change to my web page. So let's see what's going on. Oh yeah, so Melanie caught it too. That's good. Did you find anything out about whether or not to leave a hyperlink on the references? Okay, so yes, you should always have those active if that was your question. I think I'll just go ahead and look at that again real quick. So I think we're looking at, let's see if we can just find, these are like this. This should be an active link. And that's kind of a good point. This, in PowerPoint, it is not standard, but when we get into the Word, I'll go ahead and show you my words so you can see that they're blue as you normally would have them. And let me see here. Are there any other good questions here? So I don't have Word on my MacBook. I usually work in Google Docs. Is that okay instead of using Word? Oh, Molly, I think you're going to have a few things that will not translate from Google Docs as it would in a Word document. So you might want to check on that. We can talk about that as we dig into the Word as well. And do you know that Word will go on to Macs now? There's a version that is that you can download Word to a Mac computer if you needed to. Or you could save the biggest parts, and if you're in town, then come and use a library computer and change it into Word. Or you could do that at any library too. So if you're at a distance location, you can go into a public library and do that on one of their computers, or any state academic library usually is open to the public as well. Although now we're in COVID, sometimes that will not be true anymore. So, okay, let us look at our Word. I'm going to share that, and we can show how to see that. So with our bar up here at the top, we'll see how much I can really manipulate this. But I just think that sometimes it's useful to see some things here. If you're wanting to put in the page number, if you just double click insert and then come over to the header or footer of the page number, you even have some drop down options where you want to be using the top of the page according to APA, and then it needs to be all the way to the right. So then you could just click on this and it will automatically come up. If you're putting in a running head, you would just type it in here and make sure that it's all global. All capitalized. And if you needed to make sure that your font is correct here, just get in here, then go back to the home, and it will tell you what the font is, of course, and then you could change it if need be here. I'm going to close this. Some nice things that I have been using here is if you're going to be putting out the double space, this little 2-arrowed thing, if you drop down that, it will automatically have the double space set for you. I mean, you can put it there. A lot of times it'll be at 1 and you'll just drop down to 2. The other thing is, I think by default, they add a space after, and it would, when you look at it, you just say remove that so you don't have that extra space. I think Word sets up that way to begin with. So if you come in and kind of set all of that up, then you're ready to start typing and doing your setup. And then remember, there's always one extra space between your name and the title, but there's no extra spaces anywhere else. I think that's about it. Remember, you have an indentation at the beginning of your first paragraph. I don't really have a good paragraph here, but I do have a fake paragraph so that I could build some references. And so your references should look like this with the DOI as an active link. Because even as you are submitting now, everything's trying to be connected. The publishing world and libraries are trying to work hard to make sure that those are really collected and active, so that when you read something from anything like 2015 on, all those links are still active and utilized. And with a DOI, that's the whole reason of creating that digital object identifier. They should be pretty permanent. I know nothing on the web is ever totally permanent, but that's what they're hoping for. I think there's a chat here, so I'm going to grab that real quick and see. Well, maybe I am.
I think Twyla had a question, Cynthia. She said, if a female educator is not at the doctorate level, do you use MS, or is this something that we ask the educator their preference?
Yes, that is a preference by the professor. So I would just ask the professor. A lot of times when you get the syllabus, you automatically know how they want to be addressed, so you could use that. But if you're not sure, I would just ask my professor, how would you like your title to be represented in the paper? And then they would say, oh, you can just say Mrs., Ms., whatever it is the case there. So if they're don't happen to be a doctor. And so then Dr. Robertson, this is the links that they should be active here. Is that covered your question too? Okay. All right. So And then remember, you're going to have your references in the center of the page, and then them down. So let's also talk about a little bit more about a time frame with a DOI. So anything that's been published directly onto a web should have a DOI, but certain fields use this more than other fields because maybe science doesn't have DOIs built. Any document can have a DOI, but the author has to submit to it. So if it's really being utilized by APA, science really doesn't, use APA because APA is from the Psychological Association, the American Psychological Association. So there's several styles out there. Science usually uses something called CSE. So they may not think to get a DOI put on their paper. Whoop. Let's see. I'm so glad y'all are interactive tonight. That's great. Yes, that's my understanding, but we can look that up as well. So Nicole just asked that the reference pages are all references are single spaced, but that they're double spaced in between. And that's, yes, I agree with that. Okay. And so if you're looking at something, say, even from 2008, then it will not have a DOI. And of course, anything older than that will not have a DOI. So be aware of that. Okay, so it looks like we might have two things we want to kind of verify are et al. Let's make sure we can figure out that. And then we'll verify that we have a double space between the references as well. So I'm just going to get on a website. Don't tell me if you can see that. Yeah.
You may have to unshare and share again.
Okay, sure. I know that sometimes happens. Let me just get to where I'm going, and then we'll go together.
And I think, Nicole, also on the references, I know some journals out there that some do ask you to double space your references, even including, in between, as well as within the reference. So I think it just varies. Sometimes you're going to have to follow what they want you to do with their manuscript guidelines then, and sometimes it's not what APA wants. So keep that in mind too. I mean, that most of the time they follow APA, but I've noticed a couple articles I submitted that they wanted all my references all double spaced and with everything, even in between, but also within the reference.
Yes, I totally agree with that, Dr. Miller, because I think it is, sometimes they have that set up for their printing situation, depending on if they're still printing a real journal from that. So sometimes their margins are deeper. Sometimes they expect your tables to be in different formats. So those are a few things that you can kind of look for. And a lot of times that will be listed in the journal under author guidelines for publishing. So if you're questioning that even before you submit to that, you can find that information. Or that's a good time to contact your librarian. I'd be happy to help you do that as well. Okay, I think I've got myself to where we want to look for the APA style. Let me just get that up and using that. So let's see here. Nope. Okay. All right. Sorry, I couldn't quite get that to share yet. Let me get that. Okay. So as I said, I don't have the book in front of me. My copy is at the office, but I'm seeing that we were right. I was wrong. The period should not be there. So it should be ET space AL period with a comma. So I will update that on my slides. Sorry about that. So, and then shall we go ahead and look at the references too? Let's see if we can see an option of, let's see here. Well, that's not telling me exactly what I was wanting. Basic principles, maybe that will tell us. Author, date, title, source. See, this is kind of like the guide that I have linked in there. We can definitely look at that too. I just like how it has the coloring, coding. To me, that helps me. Maybe I'm just a little bit more visual in my learning, so for sure. And if you're not visual, this may not be useful to you. I was hoping to age reference elements. Do not put a period after the DOI. Let's see if I can see that real quick. But I just don't know if I can see it while we're still looking here. If we have any other questions, we can talk about that as I continue to kind of look.
Twyla pointed something out that is, I just looked it up myself. You can see it in the comments there.
Okay, let's look. Let's see what's on.
And just so everybody's on the same sheet of music, as faculty there in the department, we've talked about wanting to stick with the student version of the paper so that we're all standardized. And so that's a good point that she brings out. So I think as a department, of course, I can't speak, completely right now, but I think we would go with the double space because we're trying to stay with the student version of the APA example.
Sure,
So thank you, Twyla, for pointing that out too.
Yes, I agree with that. And I have to say, I was not aware of that, but I did point out the title page differences. But I really know professional a little bit better than student, but I'm going to get on that and kind of know that a little bit better, especially if y'all are going to use that as your standard now. So we'll be good to know that. Any other good points as we're talking about items?
Well, I noticed they don't use city and state anymore for the publisher. They just have the publisher's name, which is kind of different because I remember in 6 they did want the city and state and then a colon and then name of the publisher.
Yes.
And so that's the thing that they just want the publisher.
I can see why they got rid of it, because with the way they're publishing all over the country now, the main office might be in New York, but it got printed in California where it was cheaper. So I like that fact.
Yeah. And I really think that the globe, even though it's so big, is really kind of becoming a little smaller. So, 100 years ago, you may not know if you were talking about England or the States, depending on the name, because we have a lot of copy names. And so putting in New York, you would identify where it was coming from. But now it's almost, I just need to get to that publisher. So and you could figure out that. Especially with the web, that just gives us so much more information. So it's not like you would not be able to figure out, how am I going to contact this person? So let's see if I can quickly find that reference suggestion. Talk amongst yourselves for a minute, and then let's see if I'm right about that, especially in the student paper.
Cynthia, I have a question for you. I don't know if you addressed this before I got on. I was in another session, so I apologize for coming in late. You speak about citing, YouTube. I haven't looked for it in the 7th edition, but there was definitely not very much guidance in the 6th edition on how to cite YouTube videos, especially if it's like a narrator and then there's like a featured speaker, like which one's name do you use, or do you use the name of the organization that put on the YouTube presentation?
Sure. Let me just back up here. I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint one more time. And we did cover that a bit, but we can talk about that specifically relating to a YouTube. I think we could do that quite easily here. So I'm just going to move us out of the way a little bit. So you would put the name of whoever is producing that, or is the speaker in that. So that may be slightly different. For example, here on TED, the speaker is going to be somebody different. If it was YouTube, you would put the username here, and that might be something quite wild, but and not in a last name, first name kind of setting. But go ahead and put, if it is, I don't know, quilting with us, something like that, then you would put when that was published. And sometimes you actually have a real date here, especially on YouTube. You could find the real date. On TED, it just tells you the month. It doesn't tell you the day. Then you would put the title to that YouTube video. Then you would put in this bracket the video. Then you would put YouTube here instead of TED, clearly. And then you would put the link.
And if it is a particular speaker, so like if it's does it matter if it's a particular speaker that you note that somewhere on there, or is it good enough that you put where they can find it and they can listen to it themselves and figure out where the speaker quoted that statement?
So I would kind of decide what that is. If that's an interview, let's say Quilting with Us is having a famous interview, a famous person that quilts, and we have the host there. So the host name will be the username. But then let's say you want to really highlight that it's, this famous quilter or whatever you want to say. Or like, the Daily Show is interviewing. So not just the host is listed there, but then the guest would be listed there. There is a place to add that, and I think it would just come right after this video and the period, and you would have to put the name. But I would have to look up that formatting to really be clear here. So you would not you could definitely include that if you wanted to. I think that would be better, especially if it was just an interview between two people. Let's say it's a whole show and they're not highlighting a single other person. I would then cite that as the title to the whole show. So it depends on the YouTube a little bit. And I think that's the hard thing about citing is it depends on what you're citing just a bit. And so you have to kind of get that to kind of fit into what you're looking for. So we know it's a video, but if we're only interviewing one other person, then we would want to include that person's name. Now, that may be included in the title, so then you're good. It may not be, so depending on what it is. Does that help at all, Twyla?
Yes, it helps. And then Dr. Miller also pointed me to where the YouTube example is in the manual. So yes, both were very helpful. Thank you.
Right. And this manual is really nice in that I think that in 6, it did not have like Instagram information, Twitter information. I mean, all these little pieces, they really have a true format. So you're not kind of just looking at, oh, this is something off the web. Let me kind of build it to be what it needs to be. But it's very clear in some bigger portions of the internet are clearly represented now. And so that makes the format a lot easier. You can just go to that example and then use it.
Cynthia, when we're referencing something from social media, does that need to include a hyperlink in the references?
I would have to look that up. I'm pretty sure, depending on what the format is, I think Twitter, you could still get back to that and the link would be there, stable. I'm not an Instagram user, so I don't know if, I think the stories are not stable, but just a post in Instagram, but they also have it listed there as well. And they say, an Instagram video, it cited exactly like this. It's probably on the same page as what the YouTube video was on. Yep, there you go. So I think Dr. Miller just dropped that in the comments here in the chat. So, yeah. I saw, as I did read this book, I saw that, like Twitter, Instagram posts, YouTube, all listed separately. I did not see Facebook, which I was a little surprised. But maybe they just want you to do that as a website.
It's in there.
It is in there.
in
Okay.
section
I just didn't remember that.
10.15, paragraph
Okay.
105.
Okay. And so, I mean, I was trying to think, even some things that were confusing before, I felt like were a little bit more clear. So that's always nice when the manual is very clear on its perspective and what it expects of you, then you don't have to kind of build the site, build the citation yourself. So, any other good questions? Oh, I see some more chat. I'm going to leave that up over here on the side here, maybe. Okay. Yes, that is. So Twyla just said in chat, this is awesome. The manual provides so much more guidance. Yeah. Very user-friendly. A lot more user-friendly than I'd seen other things be. As I've used other manuals and the APA 6, I do think this one is really nice. It's a good update. So. Okay.
Just
Do you have any other questions?
There is also a desk copy out there for somebody if you want something that's a little smaller to carry with you around. It's an abridged version, but it gets right to the point. The only drawback is very tiny print. So bring your readers with you because it is hard to read, but it is very helpful to get right to the point versus the